From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
With respect to Chelsea Manning, I looked at the particulars of this case the same way I have the other commutations and pardons that I've done, and I felt that in light of all the circumstances that commuting her sentence was entirely appropriate.
In his final press conference, as President Barack Obama defended his decision to commute the sentence of Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning, he also condemned the Israeli occupation and vowed to speak out against incoming President Donald Trump if he sees the nation's core values at risk. We'll look back at Obama's legacy with Professors Rashid Khalidi and Eddie Glaude. Then, as U.S. scientists officially declare 2016 to be the warmest year ever, the Senate holds a confirmation hearing for EPA Director nominee Scott Pruitt, a longtime climate change denier.
Science tells us that the climate is changing, and then human activity in some manner impacts that change. The ability to measure with precision the degree and extent of that impact and what to do about it are subject to continuing debate and dialogue, and well, it should be.
And we'll look at Tom Price, a critic of the Affordable Care Act, Medicare, and Medicaid, who's been tapped by Trump to be Secretary of Health and Human Services. He was repeatedly questioned about investing thousands of dollars in a medical device maker shortly before introducing a bill to benefit the company. As well, he was asked about his views on Medicaid.
Did you propose to cut more than $1 trillion out of Medicaid over the next 10 years?
You have the numbers before you.
Is that a yes?
You have the numbers before you.
I'll take it as a yes.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today marks President Obama's last full day in office. On Friday at noon, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts will swear in Donald Trump as the country's 45th president. On Wednesday, Obama gave his last press conference as president, during which he warned Trump he will not stay silent if he sees what he called the nation's core values at risk. Obama also thanked the press and spoke about the role they've played during his presidency.
Having you in this building has made this place work better. It keeps us honest. It makes us work harder. You have made us think about how we are doing what we do and whether or not we're able to deliver on what's been requested by our constituents.
The incoming Trump administration has proposed moving the press corps out of the White House and instead relocating them nearby to the old executive office building. Trump had to back away from the proposal on Wednesday after outrage amongst members of the press and those concerned about press freedoms. During President Obama's final news conference Wednesday, he also spoke about his recent decision to commute Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning's sentence.
Has been my view that given she went to trial, that due process was carried out, that she took responsibility for her crime, that the sentence that she received was very disproportionate relative to what other leakers had received.
Also on Wednesday, the Office of the Pardon Attorney has announced President Obama has denied clemency to imprisoned Native American activist Leonard Peltier. Peltier is a former member of the American Indian Movement who was convicted of killing 2 FBI agents during a shootout on South Dakota's Pine Ridge Reservation in 1975. He's long maintained his innocence. Amnesty International condemned the decision, saying, quote, "We are deeply saddened by the news that President Obama will not let Leonard go home." We'll have more on President Obama's speech and legacy after headlines with Professors Eddie Glaude and Rashid Khalidi. Scientists with both NASA and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, have confirmed 2016 was the hottest year on record, topping the previous record set in 2015, which topped the previous record only a year earlier. This marks the first time in recorded human history the Earth has smashed temperature records 3 straight years in a row. Scientists with the U.S. National Snow and Ice Data Center have also announced global sea ice levels are at their lowest point in recorded human history. The unprecedented warming of the planet due to human cause climate change comes as Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt underwent his confirmation hearing to be head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Pruitt has long denied the overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change. Dozens of people protested outside his hearing. At least 3 were arrested, including Lakota water protector Joanne Spotted Bear, who was arrested while in prayer. This is Scott Pruitt being questioned by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
So you are applying for a job as administrator for the EPA to protect our environment. Overwhelming majority of scientists say we have got to act boldly, and you're telling me that there needs to be more debate on this issue. I'm asking your personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
You are going to be the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
Senator, I've acknowledged to you that the human activity impacts the climate.
Impacts. If that's the kind of EPA administrator you will be, you're not going to get my vote.
We'll have more on Pruitt's confirmation hearing later in the broadcast. Georgia Congressman Tom Price also underwent his Senate confirmation hearing to head the Health and Human Services Administration. Price is one of the leading opponents of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. He supports privatizing Medicare, opposes abortion, and has voted to cut all federal funding for Planned Parenthood. His hearing came only days after CNN reported Price invested thousands of dollars in the medical device maker Zimmer Biomet shortly before introducing a bill to benefit the company. Price's legislation sought to delay regulations that would have changed the way Medicare pays for hip and knee replacements, thereby cutting into Zimmer Biomet's profits. We'll have more on Congressman Tom Price's confirmation hearing later in the broadcast. Confirmation hearings were also held Wednesday for billionaire Wilbur Ross, Trump's pick for Commerce Secretary. Ross is worth an estimated $2.9 billion. If confirmed, he'll be one of the richest people to ever hold public office. During the hearing, Ross admitted he has recently fired an undocumented immigrant who'd been working in his home since 2009 after rechecking his household employee's documentation status. South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley also had her confirmation hearing to serve as U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. During her hearing, she criticized the UN for what she claimed was its bias against Israel, and she said she supports Trump's plan to move the U.S. embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, a proposal which has outraged Palestinians and much of the world community. More confirmation hearings are slated to take place today, including for former Texas Governor Rick Perry, who Trump tapped to head the Energy Department. Governor Perry famously attempted to abolish the Energy Department, but then couldn't remember the name of the agency during a live televised debate in 2011 when Perry was running for president. Former Goldman Sachs executive Steven Mnuchin will also have his confirmation hearing for Treasury Secretary today. Mnuchin has faced criticism for his role at One West, a bank which has been called a foreclosure machine that profited from the collapse of the housing market. On Wednesday, homeowners who face foreclosure by One West or its subsidiaries testified at a meeting held by Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. This is 84-year-old Colleen Eisen-Hudroff, who took out a reverse loan with the One West subsidiary Financial Freedom in 2006 on the home she and her husband Monroe had been living in since 1963.
My husband Monroe passed on September 12, 2014. A mere 10 days later, despite what we had been told, Financial Freedom contacted me and told me that I needed to pay off the loan immediately. This was news to me. I was in no financial position to do so. Since then, Financial Freedom has been trying to foreclose on me. I think this is an injustice in that an elderly woman was deceived, and now Financial Freedom is trying to take my home. I hear that Steve Mnuchin was a leader of the bank that is doing this to me and other seniors. I do not think a man like that should be the Treasury Secretary and in charge of our economy.
That's Colleen Eisen-Woodruff speaking about her fight to save her home from foreclosure by a subsidiary of One West, Stephen Mnuchin's bank. Two organizations have filed a complaint with the Department of Housing and Urban Development, accusing One West of discriminating against people of color by refusing to make loans to African Americans, Asian Americans, and Latinos while Mnuchin was in charge of the bank. Ahead of today's hearing, Mnuchin submitted a revised questionnaire which reveals he's the director of investment fund Dune Capital International Limited, which is incorporated in the tax haven, the Cayman Islands. He also admitted he's management posts in 7 other funds, which he claims he inadvertently failed to include on his first questionnaire. Donald Trump has announced he's nominated former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue to be Secretary of Agriculture. Perdue ran a grain and fertilizer business before becoming Georgia's first Republican governor since Reconstruction. Environmental activists have slammed Perdue for receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in subsidies for chemical corporations and factory farming. The Environmental Working Group said, quote, "It's certainly hard to imagine that a former fertilizer salesman will tackle the unregulated farm pollution that poisons our drinking water, turns Lake Erie green, and fouls the Chesapeake Bay and the Gulf of Mexico," unquote. With Perdue's nomination, Trump has now named all his cabinet choices. They're overwhelmingly white male millionaires or billionaires. If all his picks are confirmed, Trump's cabinet will be the first without a Latino member since 1988. More controversies are surfacing about some of Trump's other choices for top positions. The Washington Post reports South Carolina Republican Congressman Mick Mulvaney did not pay $15,000 in taxes for a household worker from 2000 to 2004. Meanwhile, the New York Times reports billionaire Wall Street investor Vincent Viola, whom Trump has tapped to be Army Secretary, was accused this past summer of punching a concessions worker in the face at a racehorse auction in Saratoga Springs, New York. Hundreds of people danced the night away Wednesday at a queer dance party outside Vice President-elect Mike Pence's rental home in Chevy Chase, Maryland. The dance party was a protest against the former Indiana governor's long history of pushing extreme anti-LGBTQ legislation. Pence has opposed marriage equality and anti-discrimination laws to protect LGBTQ people. Native Americans and their allies fighting the $3.8 billion Dakota Access Pipeline have scored a series of legal victories. The North Dakota Supreme Court partially granted a petition that'll open the door for out-of-state lawyers to represent the more than 600 people who've been arrested amidst the ongoing resistance. Also Wednesday, a federal judge rejected an attempt by the Dakota Access Pipeline Company Energy Transfer Partners to block the Army Corps of Engineers from beginning a lengthy environmental impact statement on the section of the pipeline slated to cross the Missouri River. The ruling means the environmental impact study will now move forward, indefinitely halting construction of the pipeline. The legal victories came only hours before, late Wednesday night, water protectors say police deployed tear gas and rubber bullets against Native Americans trying to erect a teepee on Backwater Bridge, a site of frequent police attacks. In more pipeline news, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police say more than $500,000 of damage was caused after people sabotaged an oil pipeline under construction in northern Alberta. Authorities say people used heavy machinery to dig up a section of the contested pipeline. In Africa, West African troops are amassing at Gambia's border, poised to intervene if President Yahya Jammeh does not relinquish power today. Incoming President Adama Barrow won December's elections, but Jammeh has so far refused to step down. He's been in power since 1994 and once vowed to rule for 1 billion years. The United Nations say more than 25,000 people have fled Gambia to neighboring Senegal amidst the rising tensions. Back in the United States, former President George H.W. Bush and his wife Barbara are both hospitalized in Houston. The 92-year-old former president is in stable condition after experiencing respiratory problems stemming from pneumonia. He's currently the oldest living U.S. president. Barbara Bush was hospitalized for fatigue and coughing. In Indiana, Republican legislators have sparked outrage after introducing a bill that would empower police to remove protesters blocking traffic using any means necessary. Organizers and activists opposed to the legislation have dubbed it the, quote, block traffic and you die bill, unquote. The bill is being pushed by Indiana Republican Senator Jim Tomes, who has previously pushed other controversial proposals, including one to jail transgender people for using public bathrooms that match their gender identity. In financial news, J.P. Chase will pay $55 million to settle a lawsuit with the Justice Department accusing the bank of discriminating against more than 50,000 homeowners of color between 2006 and 2009. The lawsuit accuses J.P. Chase of violating the Fair Housing Act and Equal Credit Opportunity Act. As part of the settlement, J.P. Chase does not have to admit wrongdoing, and no bankers are facing criminal charges. And in Colombia, human rights defenders Emilsen Manyoma and her husband, Joe Javier Rodallega, have been assassinated. Manyoma was a leader in the Bajo Calima's human rights organization, has been documenting human rights violations in the region. She first began organizing against the paramilitary control of the region in 2005. She and her husband reportedly received a series of threats in the days leading up to their murders. Last week, 3 other human rights defenders were killed in Colombia. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Today marks President Obama's last full day in office. On Friday at noon, Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts will swear in Donald Trump as the country's 45th president. On Wednesday, in his last press conference as president, Obama defended his decision to commute the sentence of Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning and condemned the Israeli occupation. He also warned Trump that he will not stay silent if Obama sees what he called the nation's core values at risk.
But there's a difference between that normal functioning of politics and certain issues or certain moments where I think our core values may be at stake. I put in that category if I saw systematic discrimination being ratified in some fashion. I put in that category explicit or functional obstacles to people being able to vote, to exercise their franchise. I'd put in that category institutional efforts to silence dissent or the press. And for me, at least, I would put in that category efforts to round up kids who have grown up here and for all practical purposes are American kids and send them someplace else. When they love this country, they are our kids' friends and their classmates and are now entering into community colleges or in some cases serving in our military. The notion that we would just arbitrarily or because of politics punish those kids when they didn't do anything wrong themselves, I think would be something that would merit me speaking out. It doesn't mean that I would get on the ballot anywhere.
We begin today's show looking back at Obama's legacy and what lies ahead with the new administration. We're joined by 2 guests here in New York, Rashid Khalidi, the Edward Said Professor of Arab Studies at Columbia University, author of several books, his most recent, Brokers of Deceit, How the U.S. Has Undermined Peace in the Middle East. And at Princeton University, we're joined by Eddie Glaude, chair of the Department of African American Studies. He's author of a number of books, most recently Democracy in Black, How Race Still Enslaves the American Soul, which is just out in paperback. Professor Glaude, let's begin with you. Your assessment of President Obama's message in this last news conference in the last 48 hours that he was president, holding it in the press pool room, something that has been threatened, to say the least, in the last few days, with the Trump administration saying they were thinking of moving the press somewhere nearby.
Well, I think it was important for the president to kind of identify the threat that Donald Trump poses to the Fourth Estate. He did it in his own unique and, of course, centrist way, but the idea of calling attention to the fact that a free and independent press may very well be under siege as Donald Trump enters the White House, I think was an important gesture. I would want to caution, though, that the way in which the president made the point, he, of course, wasn't attentive to the corporate dimensions of the press, that in some ways the so-called free press has been compromised by big money, by its own pursuit of profits. And so it's a critique that only goes so far. And then I think to kind of point his attention or point our attention or direct our attention to the question of Israel and Palestine, the issues around the Dreamers, the issues around race or continued inequality, the issues around LGBTQ, right, communities, I think was important as a way of in some ways, framing his own presidency over and against what is to come. But I have this fear, though, Sister Amy, that he's positioning himself as, in some ways, the voice of a kind of resistance post his presidency. And I worry about that because of his containing and limiting voice, because President Obama, at the end of the day, is just simply a centrist liberal.
During his press conference, President Obama criticized the voting restrictions in place in the United States.
We are the only country in the advanced world that makes it harder to vote rather than easier. And that dates back. There's an ugly history to that we should not be shy about talking about. Voting rights? Yes, I'm talking about voting rights. The reason that we are the only country among advanced democracies that makes it harder to vote is it traces directly back to Jim Crow and the legacy of slavery. And it became sort of acceptable to restrict the franchise.
President Obama dismissed the idea of voting fraud as fake news.
This whole notion of election or voting fraud, this is something that is constantly been disproved. This is fake news. The notion that there are a whole bunch of people out there who are going out there and are not eligible to vote and want to vote. We have the opposite problem. We have a whole bunch of people who are eligible to vote who don't vote.
Professor Eddie Glaude.
But again, I think his analysis is limited. I mean, to the extent to which the question of voter fraud or voter suppression, tracing its origins back to Jim Crow and slavery, giving attention to its racial underpinnings is right. But there's a reluctance, though, to speak to voter suppression, right? The ways in which voter ID laws are directly targeting black communities. What happened in North Carolina? What happened in Wisconsin? What tried to happen? What Texas tried to do? What Pennsylvania attempted to do? And to speak specifically to the ways in which race, and particularly the way black and brown communities are targeted today, there's a reluctance. So in other words, you get this kind of general claim about an assault on voting rights, that we're making it more difficult for people to vote, tracing it specifically to Jim Crow and the institution of slavery, but a reluctance to name specifically the ways in which Republicans across the country have targeted black and brown voters in very distinct ways. I mean, the court was very clear in North Carolina what North Carolina Republicans were doing. And instead, at this point, instead of making that move, and again, I want to begin by saying he's right to give the historical backdrop to the question of trying to limit voting in the United States. But instead of kind of pointing our attention to what specifically is happening around race, and particularly with regards to people of color today, he wants to say that people have the right to vote, but they don't vote, right? So it's a kind of, again, on the one hand and then on the other, without him really going to the core of the problem.
President Obama also warned of the dangers of rising inequality.
I worry about inequality because I think that if we are not investing in making sure everybody plays a role in this economy, the economy will not grow as fast, and I think it will also lead to further and further separation between us as Americans, and not just along racial lines. I mean, there are a whole bunch of folks who voted for the president-elect because they feel forgotten and disenfranchised. They feel as if they're being looked down on. They feel as if their kids aren't going to have the same opportunities as they did.
Professor Eddie Glaude, if you could comment on what he's saying and also where we have been and where we're headed.
Well, look, It's one thing for President Obama to point to increasing inequality in the country, and it's another thing for us to look at his policies. When we look at when we kind of assess the last 8 years, what we've seen is that you've had a series of policies that really have benefited Wall Street and left Main Street behind. We have a policy that is, in some ways, fits perfectly with the increasing financialization of our economy, that's really tailored for the top 1% and top 0.01%. And there's kind of modest gains for everyday ordinary people working. Even if they tout job creation, we know from one of my colleagues here at Princeton that 95% of the jobs created over the last 15 plus years have been part-time and contractual work. So people are working harder and earning less. So there's one thing to point to inequality, but there's another thing to kind of look to the policies that he has supported and pushed that's produced inequality. That's the first thing.
Actually,
and the second thing, the second move that we have to kind of be very, very careful about is the way in which he always engages in this equivalency. Right? We have to pay attention to the fact that there are some white voters out there who voted for Donald Trump who are catching hell. Of course there are white voters out there who have lost ground, who have suffered in this economy. But at the same time, we have to be mindful that 53% of black wealth over the last 8 years has just simply been wiped off the planet. It's gone. And has a lot to do with housing policy, has a lot to do with his failure over the last 8 years to really address the racialized dimensions of the housing crisis. And so I really want us to say that he's right to point to inequality, but I'm not sure he's the right messenger to point to inequality, if that makes sense. Now, where are we now and where are we going? Well, we have deepening racial inequality. We have deepening economic inequality. We have a neo-fascist who is about to be inaugurated. We have the billionaires and millionaires who are about to take over government. What we are in some ways, is a conjunctural moment where crisis opens up space for us to put forward a more progressive vision of what this country could and ought to be. So we need to prepare ourselves for day one. As Donald Trump ascends, and attack the policies that in some ways Barack Obama's administration, Clintonism broadly, has made possible.
Well, there was an interesting sort of geography and diversity to the questions that President Obama answered, all clearly laid out in advance. 8 reporters, 5 women, 3 men, a gay publication, urban radio, and also he took a question from Janet Rodriguez, White House correspondent for Univision, and Nadia Bilbassi Charters, senior diplomatic correspondent for Al Arabiya News Channel. She asked President Obama about the Middle East and about particularly the Israeli occupation. President Obama, in his answer, warning that the expansion of Israeli settlements was making a two-state solution impossible.
I've said this directly to Prime Minister Netanyahu. I've said it inside of Israel. I've said it to Palestinians as well. I don't see how this issue gets resolved in a way that maintains Israel as both Jewish and a democracy. Because if you do not have 2 states, then in some form or fashion you are extending an occupation. Functionally, you end up having 1 state in which millions of people are disenfranchised and operate as second-class occupant or residents. You can't even call them citizens necessarily. And so the goal of the resolution was to simply say that the settlements, the growth of the settlements, are creating a reality on the ground that increasingly will make a 2-state solution impossible. And we've believed, consistent with the position that had been taken with previous U.S. administrations for decades now, that it was important for us to send a signal, a wake-up call, that this moment may be passing. And Israeli voters and Palestinians need to understand that this moment may be passing. And hopefully that then creates a debate inside both Israeli and Palestinian communities that won't result immediately in peace, but at least will lead to a more sober assessment of what the alternatives are.
That was President Obama yesterday, again, in the last 48 hours of his presidency. Rashid Khalidi, also with us now, Edward Said, professor of Arab Studies at Columbia University. Your response to what he said and what he has done over this past 8 years.
Well, he did what he's been doing for 8 years. He sent a signal. The most powerful country on earth, the sole serious supporter of Israel, without whose support Israel couldn't do anything, has now, yet again, for administration after administration, sent a signal that what Israeli governments have been doing for decades is going to lead to a one-state solution in which Palestinians, as he said, are disenfranchised, are not even citizens, and so on and so forth. So we have the diagnostician-in-chief telling us about this problem, which he and previous presidents have done absolutely nothing to solve. The United States can, could, should act to stop this ongoing annexation, colonization, and so forth, which has led to disenfranchisement. I mean, his analysis is impeccable, but his actions, as Professor Glaude said, his actions are just not in keeping with his words and have not been over 8 years in keeping with his words.
What do you think needs to happen? What opportunity did he miss? So much has happened in the last few weeks with Secretary of State John Kerry's speech. You wrote a piece in the New York Times as well as in The Guardian saying too little, too late. Right. And now President Obama pointing to, if he's approved, the ambassador to Israel, who is very much for, among other things, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which Nikki Haley just said, right, who would be the next U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She also endorses in her confirmation hearing yesterday.
Well, the president-elect's team includes people like his son-in-law, his nominee for ambassador to Israel, and others who are not just in favor of incendiary acts like moving the embassy, but are themselves major financial or political supporters of the Israeli settler movement. So we're not just talking about people who are rhetorically in favor of this or that extremist position. Talk
specifically. You're talking about Jared Kushner, who will be a top advisor. His son-in-law, David Friedman.
David Friedman, the ambassador designate, and Jared Kushner are both, according to all the reports, major financial backers of the settlement movement. So what we have in American and Israeli politics with the arrival of Trump is the completion of a convergence between the extreme right-wing settler colonial regime that we have in Israel, and a segment of the American ruling class, if you want. I mean, Jared Kushner is a major real estate entrepreneur, and he's used many of his family's millions to support not just charitable causes in Israel, but the settler movement, among many other extreme causes. And so what we're seeing on the policy level, what we're seeing on the media level, what we're seeing in terms of people who are making political contributions to both the right-wing parties in Israel and American political parties is sort of a convergence of the two systems. But at a time when we're going to have the most extreme, we have had the most extreme right-wing government in Israel's history, and when we're going to have a president who is in favor of things that are sometimes to the right even of that right-wing Israeli government in terms of what his designees for
do you feel President Obama paved the way for this?
I think every American president who has stood by idly and just uttered words, like the president has done in his press conference and like the Secretary of State did in his speech, and did nothing to actually stop this trend that he so accurately described, they're all responsible. He is certainly responsible. Had Security Council Resolution 2334 been passed in the first year of this president's 8 years, who knows what might have happened.
And explain what that resolution is that caused so much furor, at least on the part of Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu.
That resolution said that everything Israel has done in the occupied territories in Jerusalem and the rest of them is illegal. It is said that moving its population into occupied territories is a violation of the Geneva Convention, i.e. moving 500,000 or 600,000 Israelis into territory occupied is illegal, that the acquisition of territory by force is illegal. And it went on to lay down various other parameters for a solution, including a two-state solution, and the 67 borders as the basis of that. Now, none of this is new. The United Nations has said this again and again and again. This is a reiteration of Security Council Resolution 242 of November 1967. It's also a reiteration of positions that have been taken by every single American administration, from President Johnson's to George W. Bush's, and this one as well. But had that been laid down as a marker, a slap in the face of the Netanyahu government in 2009, when the president came into office, instead of mollycoddling them, instead of continuing to fund settlements. We fund settlements by giving American so-called charities 501c3 status. The president could have reversed that on the first day he was in office, saying you cannot send money, tax-free money. You cannot reduce your taxes to support illegal occupation and colonization. He didn't do that. The Justice Department, the Treasury could have done that. So we have financed by, we taxpayers who are actually paying our taxes have enabled people who are not paying our taxes by making so-called charitable deductions support the settlement. Jared Kushner is one of them. Daniel Friedman is one of them. There are many, many others.
So what do you think is possible now?
With Trump as president? Well, I think that this should be a wake-up call for people in the United States who had some kind of idea of Israel as the light unto the nations, to wake up and realize that the United States has helped to create a situation in which Israeli Jews rule over disenfranchised Arabs, that this is not a light unto the nations. This is not really a democracy. If you have helots, he called them not citizens. Well, you can call them what you want. He said they're disenfranchised. It's actually worse than that. Go to the occupied territories. Go to Arab communities inside Israel. Look at what happened to a member of Knesset yesterday, shot in the face by Israeli border police because he protested the demolition of a village in the south of Israel. You're talking about people who in some cases nominally have rights, Palestinian citizens of the State of Israel, or in the occupied territories have really no rights, and both of whom live under an unjust and discriminatory regime. We have fostered that. We have helped to finance and fund that, all the while our political leaders talk about how wonderful Israel is, how its values and our values. Well, these are Jim Crow values. The president talked about Jim Crow. What Israel is enforcing are worse than Jim Crow values. And I think we have to start talking and thinking in those terms and setting ourselves apart, or understanding how to set ourselves apart from those kinds of practices that are discriminatory or racist.
What do you think it was that led President Obama to have the ambassador to have the United States abstain from this at the very end of his 2 terms?
I mean, I can't speculate what was going on in his mind. Why at the very end? It's a really good question. I would love to have seen this 8 years ago. Maybe it was his chance to get back at the slights and insults that he's been receiving from Prime Minister Netanyahu over the past 8 years, coming to Congress and attacking American
Netanyahu
policy.
famously, to say the least, disrespects him.
Right.
And yet President Obama has been more solicitous of Israel than all the previous presidents, from the Bushes on to Clinton, all involved with resolutions that were critical of Israel. But President Obama did not allow that to happen until now.
This is the first such resolution that has passed under Obama. As you just said, every previous American president has allowed or has sponsored resolutions that are just as harsh as this, or involved elements of this resolution. So maybe he was, what he seems to be doing in his last few days, few weeks, few months, is to do some of the things that maybe he wanted to do but felt he couldn't do, and it's really a terrible shame. I mean, this is a man who came into office supposedly with fresh ideas about how to deal with the Middle East. He appointed Senator Mitchell, who ultimately was undermined by people he himself had appointed, and was not able to do what he wanted to do. And from that point on, I think it really was downhill for this president as far as the Middle East is concerned. His legacy is not a good one as far as Arab-Israeli issues, as far as the Palestinians are concerned. Palestinians will not, and Arabs, and I would argue Israelis, should not remember this man's legacy with any fondness.
Rashid Khalidi, professor of Arab Studies at Columbia University, and Eddie Glaude, head of African American Studies at Princeton University. We thank you both for this conversation. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, we look at some of the Senate confirmation hearings, to say the least heated. Stay with us.
Ladies and gentlemen, everybody listen. I want to tell you something you'll never forget. rich or poor, illiterate or literate, no matter what you are.
Something You'll Never Forget by William Onyeabor. He died a few weeks ago, but it was just announced, this Nigerian musician. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Wednesday, scientists with both NASA and NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, confirmed 2016 was the hottest year on record, topping the previous record set in 2015, which topped the previous record only a year earlier. The unprecedented warming of the planet due to human-caused climate change comes as Oklahoma Attorney General Scott Pruitt testified in front of the Senate committee on Wednesday during his confirmation hearing to be head of the Environmental Protection Agency. Pruitt has long denied the overwhelming scientific consensus on climate change. Dozens of people protested outside his hearing. At least 3 were arrested. This is Scott Pruitt being questioned by Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders.
Some 97% of scientists who have written articles for peer-reviewed journals have concluded that climate change is real, it is caused by human activity, and it is already causing devastating problems in our country and around the world. Do you believe that climate change is caused by by carbon emissions, by human activity?
Senator, as I indicated, you weren't in here during my opening statement, but as I indicated in my opening statement, the climate is changing, and the human activity contributes to that in some manner.
In some manner?
Yes, sir.
97% of the scientists who wrote articles in peer-reviewed journals believe that human activity is the fundamental reason we are seeing climate change. You disagree with that?
I believe the ability to measure with precision the degree of human activity's impact on the climate is subject to more debate on whether the climate is changing or whether human activity contributes to it.
Senator Bernie Sanders went on to press Pruitt to state his position on the relationship between human activity and climate change.
So you are applying for a job as administrator for the EPA to protect our environment. Overwhelming majority of scientists say we have got to act boldly, and you're telling me that there needs to be more debate on this issue. I'm asking you a personal opinion.
My personal opinion is immaterial.
Really?
To the job of
you are going to be the head of the agency to protect the environment, and your personal feelings about whether climate change is caused by human activity and carbon emissions is immaterial?
Senator, I've acknowledged to you that the human activity impacts the climate.
Impacts. If that's the kind of EPA administrator you will be, you're not going to get my vote.
To talk more about Scott Pruitt, we're joined by Winona Howder, Executive Director of Food and Water Watch, recently wrote the book Foodopoly, The Battle Over the Future of Food and Farming in America. Can you talk about Scott Pruitt as the head of the EPA, the current Oklahoma Attorney General?
Well, Scott Pruitt has built his career on being a shill for the oil and gas industry. He sued EPA more than 14 times when he was the Attorney General of Oklahoma. He helped organize more than a dozen attorney generals around the country to be part of a large right-wing national law firm to harass EPA and other Obama-led federal agencies. When asked during the confirmation hearing about whether he knew how many children had asthma from the dirty air from power plants, he said no. 10% of children in Oklahoma have asthma.
I want to turn to Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley questioning Scott Pruitt about a 2011 letter the Oklahoma Attorney General sent to the EPA opposing regulations limiting emissions from the energy sector. Merkley said much of the letter was largely written by the Oklahoma company Devon Energy.
You used your office as a direct extension of an oil company rather than a direct extension of the interests of the public health of the people of Oklahoma. Do you acknowledge that you presented a private oil company's position rather than a position developed by the people of Oklahoma?
Senator, with respect, I disagree. The efforts that I took as Attorney General were representing the interest of the state of Oklahoma.
Why do you need an outside oil company to draft a letter when you have 250 people working for you?
Senator, as I've indicated, that was an effort that was protecting the state's interest and making sure that we made the voices of all Oklahomans heard on a very important industry to our state.
You said all heard, but you only sent it on behalf of a single voice, the oil company. Thank you.
Winona Howder, your response.
Scott Pruitt in writing my new book, Frackopoly. And what I found was that he was allowing industries like Devon, the giant driller and fracker, to ghostwrite letters harassing the Environmental Protection Agency.
Explain.
Well, Devon benefits from drilling and fracking oil and gas. EPA was trying to measure the amount of methane emissions. Methane is a greenhouse gas that's almost 90 times more potent than carbon. So he wrote, under the seal of Oklahoma, he sent this letter that was 95% written by Devon lobbyists to the Environmental Protection Agency. He's also worked with a lot of energy companies like Harold Hamm's Continental Resources that drills and fracks for oil in North Dakota. He engaged in a lawsuit with Harold Hamm's company, Continental, suing the Interior Department to prevent more animals from being listed under the Endangered Species Act. More than 14 times he sued EPA, an agency that he has basically demonized. He's made no secret of the fact that he wants to dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency with the blessing of Donald Trump.
I also wanted to ask you about former Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue, who Trump has just nominated to be Secretary of Agriculture. Perdue, who ran a grain and fertilizer business before becoming Georgia's first Republican governor since Reconstruction. Environmental activists slamming Perdue for receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in subsidies for chemical corporations and factory farming. Your response, Winona?
Yes, the agribusiness and chemical industry is just applauding his nomination. The former governor's cousin is the senator, the junior senator from Georgia. They are in a business together, Purdue Partners, that engages in international trade of agricultural products. When Perdue was the governor of Georgia, he named his cousin David to be at the Port Authority, an agency that's very involved in regulating the industry that they started together. He has a lot of ethics issues, and certainly Senator David Perdue should recuse himself from voting in the Agriculture Committee on this nomination and on the floor.
And finally, Rick Perry, the former governor of Texas, who has been on the board of Energy Transfer Partners, which owns the Dakota Access Pipeline. His hearing is today, his confirmation hearing for the Department of, well, I'm just saying, having the same memory lapse that the former governor did when he was running for president and said he couldn't remember the agency he wanted to get rid of. It was the Department of Energy.
That's right. Well, the public probably knows Perry best because he danced with the stars. He is completely unfit for office. The Department of Energy oversees the nation's weapons arsenal. 30% of the industry's, or two-thirds of the Department of Energy's budget goes to dealing with this horrible legacy of nuclear weapons. And he didn't even know this fact when he accepted the nomination. And in fact, he thought that the Department of Energy would allow him to do what he did when he was the governor of Texas, and that is to promote the oil and gas industry. And he just recently, in December, gave up his board membership to Energy Transfer Partners. You really couldn't have a bigger advocate for the oil and gas industry. And I think what this shows, Perry, Tillerson, Pruitt, is that the industry is no longer satisfied with just getting influence through campaign contributions. Now they actually want to put their shills in these agencies to control public policy. We will be working very hard to defeat their agenda.
Winona Howder, we want to thank you for being with us, Executive Director of Food and Water Watch. Her book, Foodopoly, The Battle Over the Future of Food and Farming in America. This is Democracy Now! When we come back, Dr. Sidney Wolf joins us to talk about Congressman Price as head of the Health and Human Services Administration, if he's approved. Stay with us.
I can think of younger days when living for my life was everything a man could want to do. I could never see tomorrow. I was never told about the sorrow. And how can you mend a broken heart? How can you stop the rain?
How Can You Mend a Broken Heart by Al Green. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. President-elect Donald Trump's pick for Health and Human Services, Georgia Congressman Tom Price, appeared Wednesday before the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions for his confirmation hearing. Price is the chair of the House Budget Committee, a member of the Tea Party caucus, one of the leading opponents of President Obama's Affordable Care Act. He opposes abortion, has voted to cut all federal funding for Planned Parenthood, also supports privatizing Medicare. This is Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts questioning Price about his proposed cuts to Medicaid and Medicare.
I want to understand the changes to Medicare and Medicaid that you have already proposed. The budget that you recently authored as chair of the House Budget Committee would have cut spending on Medicare by $449 billion over the next decade. Is that right?
I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but what we're trying.
The numbers.
Well, then I assume you're correct.
All right. So you said you'd cut it by cut Medicare by $449 billion. Your FY17 budget proposal also would have cut Medicaid funding that goes to the state governments by more than $1 trillion. Is that correct?
I think, Senator, the metrics that we use for the success of these programs is not necessarily whether the amount of money into it is what we ought to be looking at.
For Medicaid.
What we believe is appropriate is
Do you want me to read you the number out of this?
No, I'm sure you're correct. What we believe is appropriate is to make certain that the individuals receiving the care are actually receiving care.
I understand why you think you're right to cut it. I'm just asking the question, did you propose to cut more than $1 trillion out of Medicaid over the next 10 years?
You have the numbers before you.
Is that a yes?
You have the numbers before you.
I'll take it as a yes.
That's Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. Congressman Price's hearing came only days after CNN reported Price invested thousands of dollars in the medical device maker Zimmer Biomet, then introduced a bill to benefit the company. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer has called for the Office of Congressional Ethics to investigate whether Congressman Price violated the Stock Act, which restricts insider trading by members of Congress. Democratic Senator Al Franken in Minnesota questioned Price about his personal stock investments.
You purchased this $50,000 to $100,000 worth of stock in a biomedical company called Innate Immuno. We've talked about it a little bit. It's the single largest purchase in the past 3 years in a private deal that was not made available to the public. And I find it absolutely amazing that you responded that you did not know that you got a discounted price. That is absolutely amazing because we discussed this.
Well, by definition, I believe that's the nature of a private placement offering. What I said to you and what I've said to others is that I paid exactly the same price as everybody else. I disclosed it.
It was a private offering that only went to about 20 people.
Well, for more, we go to Washington, D.C. That was Senator Franken questioning Congressman Price. We're joined by Dr. Sidney Wolf, Director of Public Citizens Health Research Group. Welcome to Democracy Now! Your comments on the Price nomination.
Aside from Price's questionable moral and ethical stand in terms of these yet fully investigated purchases and so forth, as a physician, he is really not compassionate. Yesterday, he got into a tug with Senator Sanders about whether he's compassionate. His voting record is certainly not compassionate. He voted on the wrong side of legislation that would have decreased violence against women. He voted on the wrong side of things that had to do with hate crimes. He voted on the wrong side of parental leave. So he's not compassionate as a human being. He may have been a perfectly good physician, but medicine, in his view, and unfortunately too many views, is a business now. And what he has done, or in his legislation that he proposed, as opposed to what he's saying, we don't want to pull the rug out on anyone, what he's done is roll the clock back, not just before the Affordable Care Act, but back over 50 years. 50 years ago, for the first time ever, this country decided that health care was a right for two groups of people, the old and the very poor. And we all hoped that shortly after that, something would happen to add more to those two vulnerable groups of people. And the only thing that's happened in 50 years is President Obama's Affordable Care Act, which added about 20 more million people and put in important provisions such as not discriminating against people because of pre-existing illness. In an article that just appeared in the New Yorker, a surgeon and author, Atul Gawande, said, life is a pre-existing illness waiting to happen. In other words, it can happen to anyone. A quarter of people under the age of 65 already have pre-existing illnesses. So to roll back the clock not only on the Affordable Care Act, but to start eroding Medicare and Medicaid, now 51 years old, is cruel, is not passionate, and is not consistent with a doctor's ethical duty to first do no harm. As Secretary of HHS, which we hope the Senate will be wise enough to stop from happening, Congressman Price, Dr. Price, as he's technically called, I'm sure he was a good doctor when he was a doctor, has the capacity to help implement the legislation that he put forth. The Empowering Patients First Act is the cruel hoax to call a law that is going to disempower vulnerable people such as older people, Medicaid recipients, and all of the extra 10, 20 million people who got health insurance under the Affordable Care Act. What it does instead is return to the old days, not only with people who benefit from the Affordable Care Act, who will now face exclusion or unaffordable high premiums once the Affordable Care Act is repealed. So as a physician, as a person, he isn't compassionate. He does not adhere to the ethics of the medical profession, which has first, do no harm. He is a Secretary of HHS who will orchestrate and quarterback harm to the most vulnerable people in this country, and he should be opposed for that reason. In addition to these yet unanswered questions about his treating the healthcare industry, a $3.2 billion industry, the biggest industry in the country, as a business, making money as he can off of it, unanswered questions about whether he used information that he had to make these investments. The whole picture, his voting record, the law that he sponsored, the Empowering Patients First Act, and what he's doing in terms of the stock market raised questions about someone
Wolf,
even.
We're going to have to leave it there, but I want to thank you very much for sharing your thoughts with us, Dr. Sidney Wolf, Director of Public Citizens Health Research Group. And that does it for today's show. Very happy birthday to Edith Penty, and special thanks to Hafat Petri of ThoughtWorks, today his last day. We will be broadcasting for 8 hours tomorrow from 8 Eastern Time to 3 from the inauguration, and on Saturday 10 to 3 covering the Women's March on Washington, D.C. Check out democracynow.org. I'm Mimi Goodman. Thanks for joining us.